We're at the Warrior Project here in Fayetteville, Tennessee, and today we have veteran Thom Gilmore. Thom, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I was born and raised in eastern North Carolina. My entire family, going back hundreds of years, I guess it is, all military branches, and realized pretty much as I got to the end of high school, I wasn't much, but didn't have much smarts to do anything else. So I followed in their footsteps and joined the Air Force after graduation. So.
What year was that?
I graduated in 1980, joined actually what they call the delayed enlistment program in June of 1981, and left for basic training in March of 1982.
Where was basic training?
All Air Force trains at Lackland Air Force Base, Texas. There.
Tell me a little bit about basic training.
Compared to the others, ours at that time was the, I guess the cream of the cake walk. Ours was only 6 weeks long, very not intense like Marines or Army and the Navy. Ours was a lot of classroom stuff. We spent, I think, one day on the firing range and one day going through what they call the obstacle course, just kind of get our feet wet. But ours was the majority of just classroom learning and stuff like that.
Well, tell me a bit about what you learned and what it led you to be.
Learned, they instill the Air Force history into you. You learn about the different branches, how they all kind of fit together, the rank structure that you're getting into. Make sure you salute an officer. That's a big one. Just a lot of it though is just teamwork, camaraderie. Making sure that the saying "there's no I in team" that is hit home very quickly. And pretty much what they're trying to do, I think, is they tear you down to just the basic and then build you back up. And I mean, that goes as far as when you get there, everybody has to be the same. Males have their heads shaved about like mine is now. And then it's just same uniforms, same hairdo. If you have glasses like mine, those are taken away and you're given what they used to call the Air Force, birth control glasses, just the plain black. That's what they were called. And but I mean, everybody was pretty much like a mold, and that's what they wanted to show that everybody is equal, and then they build you back up to where you're a team and working together. And like I said, a lot of it though is just customs and courtesies, dealing with each other, but especially those that outrank you, especially officers. History of the Air Force. I don't know. It's been a while since I couldn't tell you what all we learned.
So that was in 1980?
That was in 1982. I went March of 82.
Tell me a bit about what happens after that.
While you're there, if you come in without a job assigned to you, they spend one day with you going over different kinds of jobs that the Air Force office offers. They let you know how many openings are in each job, and you can kind of pick one that you want to go into. I chose at that time air transportation, which is working around the aircraft, putting passengers and cargo on and off the aircraft. And then after you finish up your basic training, you go to what was called a tech school, technical training. And hours for that little job was only 6 weeks long, so it was just like the basic training. And went there, and that was in Wichita Falls, Texas at the time. I believe that has been moved now, but trained there for 6 weeks, left there and went to first base was Frankfurt, Germany, at the Frankfurt. It is now Frankfurt International Airport, but at the time we shared runways with Frankfurt International, and our side was the military side was Rhein-Main Air Base, which had a storied history to it from the Berlin airlift was flown in and out of there. So it was went over initially with my wife for a 3-year tour. We were supposed to be 3 years, and loved it so much we stayed 9 years there at Frankfurt. But like I said, just everybody that you talk to that was stationed at Rhein-Main, it closed in 2005 because the civilian airport needed the land. But they'll tell you in a heartbeat that was the best assignment they ever had. And it was just so centrally located in Europe that you could my wife and I used to tell people, we'd pack a bag and not know where we're going. We'd get in the car and drive a couple hours, and you could be in, any of 5 or 6 different countries just that quickly. And just, we were there to, a lot of things that we look back on now that were so newsworthy. We were there when the Marine barracks in Beirut got bombed. All of those deceased came through us. That was a tough time. But that was when a lot of the hostages were being kidnapped in the Middle East. Terry Waite was a hostage negotiator until he got kidnapped, and I remember specifically him coming up and being released, and they landed right there outside of our office, and had all the major news networks there filming all that, and just stuff. Got to didn't actually meet them, but got to work for the royal family some, because they had a lot of family there in Germany near Frankfurt, so they would fly in, and we would work their aircraft, and I think the Prince Philip came in a time or two, the Queen Mother came in a time or two, and so it was just neat things that I would tell my family in the States. I said, what y'all are seeing on the news tonight, we saw, standing here 30 feet from it. Got to see and meet Bob Hope on his last USO tour. That was a big thing. So,
Wow.
How long were you in the service?
I served 28 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Like I said, I knew I couldn't do much else. Had to stay where I could get a paycheck. Both my wife and I, both of our families are career military. My dad and brother retired. Her dad and brother retired, and then, it goes nephews and grandparents, uncles, everybody. I have traced my family tree back to. Right now, I've kind of quit at 1300, and there has been military service the entire time. So,
how were you treated by the German people when you were stationed there?
They had a tendency sometimes, and especially the younger, and that sounds odd, that the younger people were not as open, excuse me, as the older ones, but I think the older ones knew why we were there, because they had lived, a lot of them had lived through World War II, and but the young ones a lot of times acted like they didn't want us there. To make an enemy very quickly was to go out the gate and try to talk English only. If you went out and tried to speak German, they would be very accommodating to you and either try to walk you through it, or they would immediately start talking English to you. But they wanted you to at least, give them a try to do that. That kind of showed that you had an understanding of, that we were guests there. So, but it was, I had to go back in a heartbeat. And
So he's over there 9 years.
we were there 9 years. Like I said, we were supposed to go for 3 years and loved it so much. And I told my wife, I said, here's the deal. We love it here. We like what we're doing. Wherever I go, I'm going to be doing the same job. I may go somewhere where the job isn't as good as it is here. So we just went for the 3-year tour, then extended for another 3-year tour, and then extended for a third one. So
Where else were you stationed?
we left there. I've had some rough duty stations. I left there and went to Fort Walton Beach, Florida, at Eglin Air Force Base, and finished up my tour there. Eglin is one of the largest military installations in the world, but you don't realize it because the base itself is not all that large, but the land mass that they take up is a little over 700 square miles. And when I finished up with the Air Force there at Eglin, I went 20 miles up the road to Duke Field Reserve Base, worked up there for, several years there, and then I left there and went to Seymour Johnson, North Carolina, and which is about 50 miles from where I was born and raised. So that was very nice. We were back to, my wife's parents were still living at that time. My mom had passed away, but I still had cousins and an aunt and stuff that gave us a good opportunity, to kind of be a burr under their saddle for a little while. And then I retired out of Seymour and moved here. So.
Now, why did you move to Fayetteville?
I get asked that a lot from people that are here.
That's a good question.
What made you picked this place. And a lot of them would tell us when we first got here, said, man, why would you retire here? I was born and raised here, and I couldn't, if I had an opportunity, I'd leave in a heartbeat. And I'm just going, you need to stop and realize my wife and I have lived all over the world. Mm-hmm. We chose to retire here. It's a laid back lifestyle, and contrary to what people here think, there's low taxes. I like being here because we're close to Huntsville, we're close to Nashville, but we don't have all the headaches that those two metropolises have. But we can get there quickly if we need to. Mm-hmm. But it's just, I think we were led here.
Well, we're glad to have you here.
Well, thank you. We had some situations that arose since we were here that we couldn't have been anywhere else and gotten the support that we had after we got here medically. So it's just, like I said, I told my wife one time, I said, yeah, we were put here for a reason. So I think that's why. Pretty much I just spun the wheel and threw a dart, and Fayetteville it was.
Wow. The grass is always greener for locals.
Right. It always seems. But I tell people when we first got here, they said, where'd you move to? I said, we're in Mayberry. I mean, this is just, it's just so easy and laid back. People are friendly. If your car breaks down, there's normally someone going to stop, because I'm not really mechanical inclined. So I tell people, I said, if you lift the hood, 9 times out of 10, I can identify the motor, but then I'm out there. So I drove entertainer coaches out of Nashville for several years after I got retired and stuff. And I used to tell, when I went to drive for somebody, I was just, look, I am a driver. If this thing breaks down, you're on your own. I'll help you find a diesel mechanic to come out here. But other than that, I'll sit in the AC while somebody's back there working on that motor or something. So.
Well, we got to 1990 or so after you left. Tell us a little bit more about your military career after you got back over here.
Our daughter was born in Germany, and we came back in 1991. She was just before she was 3 years old, down at Eglin, doing the same thing, passengers and cargo. Got to do some interesting stuff. Eglin's just an interesting base. They have what's called the climatic hangar, which is the world's largest hangar, that when they shut the doors, they can do everything in there that Mother Nature can do outside. And that's where they test all the aircraft. And I mean, the C-5 Galaxy aircraft is the largest in the Air Force inventory, and they can pull it in there and shut the doors so that entire plane is enclosed. And to give you kind of a mental picture of how large it is, the buses I drove out of Nashville, which are the same as Greyhound uses, they can put 12 of those inside of a C-5. Wow. 3 beside each other and then 4 deep. And the plane can be knelt all the way to the ground and both ends opened up, and you could actually drive through, enter at the back, go out the front if that's what you need to do. It's an amazing, and in my entire 28 years, I never got tired of being around that kind of aircraft. It's just, I could go out there and just walk under one. It's just amazing to think that thing gets in the air. But they hold a lot of cargo, though, I'll tell you. And especially on days like this when you're out there having to push a 10,000-pound pallet, and that particular plane holds 36 of them. So you get sweaty. Or on the other end of the spectrum, Rhine-Main got really cold. So very few days where you were out there in a prime atmosphere to load cargo. But Eglin had a much smaller cargo and passenger mission than obviously Rhine-Main did. Germany was they called the gateway to Europe. All the passengers and cargo went through that little base. But Eglin was a lot smaller. Their mission was testing aircraft, all the different kinds that are going to come into the Air Force inventory, come down there, or just new systems that they're going to do, missile systems and lasers and stuff that the aircraft are going to be using in battle or whatever reason are down there, and they test those. So we would have not nearly the amount of cargo coming in and very few passengers, but if they were running a test on an aircraft, they would have to bring in the test equipment, so we still ended up doing that. My main mission down there outside of cargo was working the little small passenger terminal, we might do 10 or 12 passengers a month or a week or something. But we had a lot of C-21, which are small Lear jets, and had a lot of stars come in, brass generals and stuff that would come in for meetings and stuff. So I got to meet different people and things there. When I left Eglin, I went up to Duke Field, it's still part of the same career field, but it was an entirely different spectrum of what I was used to. Was aerial delivery, where we would pack the parachutes for aircraft loads, cargo that was dropped out of the back of aircraft. And that was interesting. It's amazing. There's not that many different types of parachutes for cargo, but every one of them has a different way that has to be packed, and how many of the parachute cords have to be wrapped together and tied in a certain way and at certain levels on the length of below the canopy of the parachute to the actual cargo. And that was another thing I enjoyed watching. Was once they'd get a load on an aircraft, they would sometimes have a camera in there, and you'd watch it shoot out the back of the aircraft. And that's just, man, that's something I just did. And buddy, I hope that parachute opens correctly. So,
I'm sure it's a very large parachute too.
Yeah, those the cargo ones are huge, and there's normally a lot of the cargo that we had to shoot out was so heavy there'd be either 2 or 3 cargoes that would come out and open. But one of my favorite stories on aerial delivery, we were out of a drop zone, and the drop zone, I think they said, was about 100 acres, and we had to put out these, probably about the color of my shirt, arrows out in the middle of it for the aircraft to come over. They'd see it, then they'd come back and line up to try to hit that as close as they could. Well, it was kind of a running joke. The best place to be on that drop zone was next to that X, because they never hit it. So we were out there one night, and they did a lot of night drops because that's where you need the training a lot. And but we were out there one night, and we had a 4-door pickup truck, and we're sitting there, heard the airplane come in, talked to them. You know, the X is on the ground. They marked it and came back by, and we were sitting there, and the next thing we knew, it sounded like thunder had landed right beside our truck, and the passenger door you couldn't get open because that's where that pallet landed. And it just, if it had been a foot over, it would have just crushed the car or the truck, because at that time, that particular drop, when they didn't have actual cargo to drop, we had what we called them pet rocks, and that's all they were was a big 10,000-pound block of concrete. And I mean, that's what landed that close to that truck. And so close you couldn't get the door open to get out. We all had to get out on the driver's side. But it was just after that, we all just put the arrow out and then drove off the drop zone. So different. That was one of the heaviest bundles or drops that we did was for training. Was that we also had some that they had to have different types of cargo, excuse me, so they could get different fields. And one of them we would have were 55-gallon plastic drums of water, and that we would put the honeycomb cardboard under it to cushion it and stuff. So we had been doing that for quite a while. Well, then headquarters came down and said, we're trying to cut costs. We want to see how many honeycomb it takes to safely get the barrels on the ground. So one of the first one we had gone out, they had told us, I think, to take 2 or 3 levels of the honeycomb cargo or cardboard out. And we were out there, and I saw the thing come out, and it was just dropping fast. And it just, the chute opened, but it was not keeping up with 4 barrels of, 55 gallons of water each. And it hit the ground, and those barrels just split. The water, I mean, just probably went 100 feet in the air. And I told the young lady that was with me, I said, man, I'm glad we got to see that. But after that, they started adding cardboard back until they got the ratio worked out. But
so it was just too heavy.
That one was too heavy. Well, the weight was correct, but they just didn't have enough cushioning under it to make that. And just over time, the things that stick with you are obviously the mistakes that happen. And I have seen one. The Army does a lot of cargo, because when they go into a zone, war zone or something like that, they're dropping, paratroopers in there, but they've also got to drop the vehicles and weapons and stuff. But they were having a simulated war zone drop, and somebody decided that they I think they said they were getting ready to separate from the Army, but they ended up shooting 3 Humvees out the back of one of the planes, and they had fixed it so that as soon as they came out, the Humvees did not attach to the chute, so they just dropped straight to the ground, 3 of them in a row. So the first one, they were just, man, something went wrong with that. We'll have to investigate. And then you can hear them on the video that's being made. They're just the second one, just, oh, that's not right. The third one, okay, we're going to have to find somebody. But they knew then that it was obvious that somebody had done something. But I mean, stuff does happen, every once in a while. Some with a vehicle, the wind may catch it or as it lands and flip it upside down or something. That's just, it's not ideal, but that can be worked with. But aero delivery was a fun thing, and it's funny. People mention a lot of times that the military is a family and a brotherhood, and it's the same thing. I've got friends that I was stationed with 40 years ago that we keep up with each other. In fact, a friend of mine, I finally convinced him to move here from Illinois. That he and I met right after I left basic training. We were at the tech school at Wichita Falls together, got stationed in Germany together, and then have just been buds ever since. 40 years this year. So
now, what other job could you have done, or it would be available to a young person? Some of those for the Air Force.
For today, it's just, I mean, the spectrum's wide open. If you stop and think, a military base is a city, and it has to be self-contained. So anything that's done here in Fayetteville or in Huntsville, they have people on an Air Force base that can do that, from civil engineers to people running a restaurant. They have a dining facility or a chow hall. People are doing that. We have mortuary affairs. That it's something people don't want to think about, but that's a job that has to be done. We have that, and this is all branches, not strictly to the Air Force, but any base that you go on has to be self-sufficient. So like I said, the police force, fire department, everything that you can think of, there's somehow related. A military job related to it. So
That's interesting.
Well, yes, it is.
Never
Very.
even thought about that.
yeah.
I hadn't either.
In fact, the base that the aero delivery is all taught by the Army, and they only have it at, I think the only base they do it at is at Fort Lee, Virginia, and that's also the base where they teach or instruct mortuary affairs, and that's where the initial basic training for that is. I didn't see them while I was there. But
Okay, you said that your basic training, I'm interested in the basic training. You don't go through all of the physical stuff that these other branches do.
I'm glad I don't now. But at the time, the Air Force was very, I don't want to say lax, but I think the thinking at that time was that we were not going to be on the battlefield.
Right.
So we were not out there crawling through we did have the one day where I said we went to the confidence course where, we're out there crawling through the sand, and they've got some kind of a machine gun set up, but it's not shooting anything. It's just the sound of it to make you keep your head down. And we had to eat at the time it was the old sea rations in the little cans, where nowadays it's always the MREs in the pack. But the Air Force, I guess the mentality at that time was, we're not going to sit there and spend all of our time training this guy how to go out and be a sniper or whatever. And so ours, like I said, ours was more, I don't want to say how to say things that it sounds derogatory to other branches, but ours was a lot more mental instead of physical.
Yeah.
But nowadays that has changed. I think the Air Force is up to pretty much matches a lot of the other branches at 12 weeks. They are doing a lot more hands-on because not just the Air Force, the military has become, the Air Force was always blue, the Navy was white, the Army was green. They're calling it now, a lot of it's purple, because all the different branches are having to work together. And normally they don't get a lot of notice, but anytime the Army is out in a situation in Afghanistan or something like that, for example, there will be Air Force with them that handles contacting the planes. They're called Joint Terminal Air Control or something. But they're out there that direct all the planes and helicopters, to keep them away from the U.S. troops, and they're letting them know where the enemy's at. But they're always embedded with the unit that they're traveling with. So there's always somebody, normally always an Air Force person with
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that either.
I was a friend of mine that I worked with at I was on a short tour at Pope Air Force Base, North Carolina, and I was working with a female there that her husband was one, and he was constantly over training, with the Army, traveling with the Army. His haircut was like the Army, and I'm just, dude, you may as well just get a piece of Velcro for your Air Force and just put Army on when you're out there with them. So.
We're working together, but we still have this.
Right, exactly. And there's always a rivalry.
Oh, yes.
And that's still today. I mean, wherever you go, I mean, you can sit there and talk bad about another branch, but buddy, don't let somebody that's not in the military talk bad about it, because you're going to sit there and fight for them just like they were, your branch too. So it's a good family thing.
So you're in the Air Force during wartime, Desert
Right.
Storm. So did that change your job in any way during that
It
time?
did not. You always train for war, and hoping you never have to use that training. But when Desert Shield kicked off, we were ramping up. I have never seen so many planes and cargo come through Frankfurt. At the time, I was talking about the C-5 aircraft. At the time, the Air Force had, I think it was 104 of those in the inventory, and at one time we had 26 of them broken on the ramp at Germany, waiting for parts of different kind. In fact, they had to go out, and we had run out of ramp space to park anything else, and they contacted, supposedly, Frankfurt International, and they didn't ask that, hey, we know we need this taxiway here. They told them, said, we're taking this taxiway here because we have got to get these planes on the ground so we can get the supplies down where it needs to be. But it was just a hell time, I'll put it that way. And I mean, I say that from an Air Force point of view. I cannot imagine what the folks, in the desert, the Army and the Marines and stuff like that out there having to wear the chemical suits and stuff like that. We didn't have all that, but ours was just, nonstop. Our normal hours would be a 12-hour shift, and during those, our 12-hour shift would end and the next shift would come on, and it was taking us normally about 5 to 6 hours to brief them of what all had come on and what all they were going to be facing. Then we'd go home and sleep and have to come back and then, the same thing the next morning for them. They were giving us a 5 or 6 hour briefing to get everything done, and it was just, anytime a plane came in, you had to go out and verify the cargo that was on it, and make sure the passengers were taken care of. And there was the times during that period where if a plane came in that was actually ready to immediately take off again, we had planes come in and leave that we never even got on, had no idea what could not verify the cargo. We just did not have the manpower because there were so many planes coming in so quick and then turning around taking back off to go. But my time at Rhine Mine during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, I ended up going to Incirlik, Turkey, which was just outside of Iraq, the northern portion of Iraq. And we did some of the aircraft into there and loaded them up. And I forgot what airbase they were going into to get closer to Iraq. If I recall correctly, I don't have a map, but I believe Turkey and Iraq have a small border where they connect, but some of the planes came into Incirlik Air Force Base, and then they would take off from there. So we were pretty much safe there. I think at one point said they shot a couple of Iraq Scud missiles towards us, but their aim was not real accurate. So we pretty soon realized, okay, it's not that big of a deal. So, but we stayed there and did that for. I was there several weeks. I don't think I was there quite a month or whatever. It was one thing when we first got there. We were working at the Incirlik International Airport, and a plane came in with. We were trying to feed the Kurdish because Saddam had cut them off to where they couldn't get anything. So different countries were sending in food supplies that could be trucked down to the border and to help feed them and take care of them and stuff. But I distinctly remember it was odd. We were out there having to unload a commercial plane by hand because the plane was so old, and it turned out you've got U.S. military on a Middle Eastern Airlines which is Lebanon, which at the time we were not on real good terms with, and we were being guarded by Turkish military. And I'm just, man, what a circle. But it was an old Boeing 707 aircraft that was cargo, and like I said, it was just so old there was no other way to load it and unload it than by hand. So we just had to make a train, hand to hand, downloading all these boxes of food that would then be trucked up to or over to the Kurdish border. But that was a interesting time. I ended up, after I got down to Eglin after leaving Germany, after the ground war was over, and when Saddam was still in power and doing what he could to get rid of the Kurds, ended up going back to Turkey, and I was there for I think 3 months at that time, and kind of doing the same thing. It was what they called Operation Provide Hope, where we were bringing in supplies and then getting it trucked down there to them. So, and I was there when the Air Force accidentally shot down 2 Army helicopters. It was all great news. They thought that they had the intelligence they got that they fed to the Air Force was that it was 2 Iraqi helicopters that were headed to the Hind, trying to hurt the Kurds that were on the ground. So the AWACS airborne control plane got the information to 2 Air Force F-15s, and so they shot down the 2 helicopters thinking they were Iraqi, and it turned out that they were U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopters. And like I said, when the Air Force landed back the 2 planes landed back at the base, it was all, hey, we got 2 enemy helicopters. And then shortly it was announced that they were actually our own helicopters. So that was a tough time there. So it's as much, obviously there's always more good that you remember from your military, but there's also things that stick with you, stuff like that. But after my aero delivery time, I ended up going to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base there in North Carolina, and they didn't have much of what we called a air transportation, so I switched to ground transportation, which is funny, me having absolutely no concept of mechanics, but I had all the mechanics working for me and all the different jobs that went with ground vehicles, from the drivers that drove them and the folks that dispatched them out to the different jobs there on base, and all the mechanics and stuff all worked for me there. In fact, it was always a running joke with my family. They couldn't believe I actually joined the Air Force because I am not a fan of flying. And I always told people, I said, well, I made sure I had a job that kept me on the ground. And I only ended up in the Air Force by accident. In 1981, when I first went to the recruiter, my dad and brother were both retired Navy. My brother was active duty at the time, so he had given me the name to his Navy recruiter, and I went down to initially see him, and he happened to be out at lunch, so the Air Force recruiter invited me to come in and sit at his office to wait for the Navy recruiter to come back, and by the time the Navy guy got back from lunch, I had already signed up to be in the Air Force.
Okay, I want to ask you a hard question.
Oh boy.
You've mentioned women, working with women in a couple of places. What was it like working with? Was there a difference? Was it
never had a problem? I had female commanders, female supervisors. Never had a problem. I do. Different friends and I talk today that if we were in, we would either have no stripes or we would have been kicked out, because the entire mentality was different. Jokes could be told that didn't offend people. I remember some of the stuff that went on, just horseplay that nowadays would be,
right?
Yeah. And ours, when I was in it, normally you had a chance to make a mistake. In fact, I worked with was a tech sergeant at the time, which is an E6. I was a very low enlisted person, probably E1 or E2 at the time, and he was joking. He said that he had lost enough stripes that he could have been an E9 2 or 3 times. But I mean, that's the way the things were then. You know, if you were a good worker, you always had a commander could give you a second chance. And now there's a lot of what they call a one and done. You make one mistake, and a lot of times it's just something simple that, but they're looking for the cream of the crop, and it's, I don't know, like I said, the entire mentality of the military has changed. I'm not saying it's for the worst, but as far as just the way the military, the people serving don't have, I'll say, the respect. And I see that a lot of times on Facebook pages. A comment will be made on a military page, and a retired person will make a comment about it, and these young kids just eat them for lunch. And I just finally left a couple of the pages because it was like, there's no respect. Well, things have changed. We don't do it that way now. And I'm sitting there going, well, when I was in, we didn't do it the way they were doing it then. But at some point, you're going to be sitting where I am, and your history is going to make a difference in what's being done. You're where you are today because of the mistakes I made when I was in.
Exactly.
So, but
if you had it to do over, would you go back in the Air
every
Force?
day. And I mean, I was driving down to Huntsville a couple of probably a week, 10 days ago, and an Air Force C-17, which is just a little bit smaller than the C-5, actually a lot smaller when they park beside each other. But I guess one was doing what they call touch and goes out at the airport, where they'll come in, touch down, and go back off. But I could just sit there all day and just watch that, and I'm sitting there thinking, man, I miss that. And when you're out there that day pushing a 10,000-pound pallet, sweating to death or freezing to death, you're just, man, I can't wait till I retire and get away from this. And buddy, I'd go back in a heartbeat. Well, I couldn't now because I wouldn't pass the physical fitness requirements. But if it was just like it was when I was in, it gets in your blood. I mean, you'll hear that from a lot of like police officers and fire departments, stuff like that. When you work that close together and your life depends on somebody or something like that, you're there for a reason. And it's not like, somebody that's at a fast food or a department store or something like that. They don't have the family atmosphere. And
Right.
but
Yeah.
military can be rough on each other, but like I said, they don't want anybody else being rough on them. And that's good. I mean, it's just little things. So.
Anything else? Thom Gilmore, we appreciate you sharing your stories with us about in the Air Force. And we've had Linda Williams here. I'm Don Counts, and we're at the Warrior Project, and we appreciate you sharing your story with us today.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Thank you.